D&D number 11, Circle of Life in Jesus' Name, Part 3, Chapter 15. It's still November 1st, Friday evening, Brookside High School football stadium. Young Eric walked slowly beside Jordan. They were bringing up the rear of a large entourage. That entourage was making quite a stir, even though they'd arrived extra early to keep that from happening. The entire family was surrounded by AMT agents, making the large group even larger. The group included Ricky and Bree, Gabe and Taylor, Jeffy and Cam, Jensen and Kimmy, Jason and Angel, Justin and Lori, Eric and Shelley, with Angelina, Nate, Noah, Abe, and Manny, Melody and Logan, Bella with M, and Joey and Breeze with Sophia, Kelston, and Ledger, young Eric and Jordan, and finally, Jamie and Josie. The only ones who weren't there were JoJo, who had a game in North Dakota the next day, and his father Mark, and Jeff and his two boys, who went along to support JoJo. Jeff's wife, Mickey, opted to stay home and relax since she was in her last trimester and feeling tired. And Jewel Perez, soon to be Brooks, following the Keno's lead to be in service, decided to go to the Davis home and take care of Mickey. When she learned that Mickey was pregnant at the age of 42 and her family was out of town, Jewel decided to visit, cook her dinner, and get to know her better. Logan would have usually been at JoJo's game, but had to stay home because he had a gig tomorrow at a coffee house. Tonight, he decided to get to know Melody a little better. Young Eric walked beside Jordan as she ambled along on her crutches. She donned a baseball cap and sunglasses to try to cover the scabs and scratches and bruises that were on her face. Not because she was ashamed of them, but because she didn't want to draw attention to herself. News of the attack on Eric Keno's girlfriend had hit the news the very next day, and she truly hated being in the news. She suddenly stopped a moment and looked around. "What's wrong, babe?" young Eric asked. Her eyes moved up to his face. Did you hear that?" "What did you hear?" "Someone said, 'Die, Jordan.'" Her face crumpled. You didn't hear it?" He shook his head. "Okay, Jordan, don't get upset. Let's go find our seats and we'll talk about it." She nodded and started walking again. "Do you think I'm losing my mind?" He shook his head. "Of course not. But you are traumatized, and it may take it a little while before the trauma heals. So I must be very weak, because you were kidnapped and beat up and almost buried alive, and you seem like you're just fine." "Well, if you recall, I wasn't fine at first. It takes a little time. Give yourself a few more days. Be kind to yourself. We've also had a different upbringing. Yours was full of hardships and sadness and struggles, and mine was not. So you, 2-3, are much stronger than me." She smiled but shook her head. "You're good for my ego anyway. What would I ever do without you?" "You would do horrible without me. You remember that." She giggled. Climbing the stadium steps was difficult, and young Eric was tempted to just lift her and carry her up, but she asked him to not make a spectacle and just stay right behind her in case she needed help. Finally, they took their seats, and immediately young Eric went down to speak with his grandfather about what Jordan thought she heard. After speaking together for a few minutes, both men came up to Jordan. Young Eric sat beside her, and Grandmaster Keno knelt down in front of her and asked her to take her glasses off. And once she did, he looked deeply into her eyes. "Jordan," he said softly, "when you heard those words, 'Die, Jordan,' were they audible, or did you hear them inside your head?" She thought a moment. "Well, at first I thought I heard it. I looked around to see who would have said such a thing, but now that I think about it, maybe it was inside my head. Grandmaster Keno, do you think I'm losing my mind?" He smiled a kind smile and took her hand. "No, sweetheart. I don't want to frighten you, but there are dark forces in this world, and they are just as real as God and Jesus, and they never stop working. They zero in on the brightest lights and you try to stop them. The demon in that young man, it saw you and knew immediately that it had to end you. We won't let that happen. The fight we fight, though, is a spiritual battle, so that means putting on the full armor of God every single day. As you grow stronger spiritually, you'll be able to do that easily. For now, he stopped speaking a moment and took her hands in his. I rebuke that darkness in the name of Jesus Christ. Jordan jolted as if she'd heard a bass drum pound right next to her. Father, we ask for your protection for your daughter Jordan. Fill her with your light. Protect her, Father. Send your angels to watch over her and keep her. In Jesus' powerful name, amen. Amen, young Eric whispered. Jordan looked up at the man with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Grandmaster Kino. I feel better already. Lighter. He smiled. You are a powerful man. When you spoke, when you rebuked the darkness, it was so loud, it was like it reverberated through me. Well, that's not my power, Jordan. That's the power of God. In his name, we have power over the darkness. Have the faith and command it to be, and it will be. I'll work on developing that faith. I believe you. He rose, bent, and kissed the top of her head. Young Eric rose and shook his hand. Thanks, Granddad. He smiled at his grandson. You work on your faith too, because you too have the power to help her. Young Eric nodded. Yes, sir. I started to do it myself, and then I thought, maybe I'd better get Dad. But then I thought, Jordan's been talking to you in counseling sessions, and she might be more comfortable with you. And then I thought she'd actually be more comfortable with me. But am I strong enough? And so, Eric Sr. smiled. Truly, you have a dizzying intellect, he quoted from his wife's favorite movie of all time. Get strong, no doubts. Why do you think the dark forces are gathering against Jordan? They don't want you two together. They don't want you two to join forces to bring more of God's warriors into this world. But we can't let them stop us. God is gearing up for a huge battle, and it might be coming sooner than we think. And that battle is a spiritual one, and we need all the warriors of light that we can get into this realm. Young Eric frowned. What are you saying? He smiled. You know exactly what I'm saying. Young Eric nodded. Okay, I hear you. Well, don't take my word for it. Pray. Listen, God will tell you what he wants you to do. Yes, sir, I will. Grandmaster Keenan went back to his seat, and immediately Nate and Angelina asked if they could go sit with young Eric and Jordan, and permission was granted. A few minutes later, a group of girls from Taylor's volleyball team came up to see if Taylor and Gabe could come and sit with them for the first part of the game until they had to go down and get ready to walk on the field during halftime. They also were given permission, though Agents Wyatt and Brown had to stay with them at all times. The two kids and their bodyguards headed down to the 40-yard line student section, causing a huge stir. Young Eric watched as other high school guys in suits, who obviously also would be escorts, shook hands with Gabe. Whatever Gabe said had them laughing. Taylor smiled up at him with stars in her eyes. His sister was madly in love. They watched the teams warm up on the field for a while, and then young Eric turned to Jordan. Can I get you anything? Something from the concession stand? She grinned. What are you going to get? I was thinking of some popcorn, maybe. When she frowned, he smiled. And maybe something chocolate? She smiled. Something chocolate sounds good. He laughed. You got it. Be right back. She nodded. He stopped to ask others if they'd like anything, and it began to be a contest to see if he could remember everything. Out of mercy, Logan rose and went with him, and as the cousins/brothers stood in line, they caught up on more news. So, Logan, made any headway with Melody? He grinned but shook his head. I haven't had much time to do much of anything. I asked her if she'd like to come see me play at the coffee house tomorrow night, though, and she said yes. So let's just see how that goes. Cool. Jordan and I will keep her company while you play. How interested are you in her? Logan shrugged. She's good looking. She's really good with the kids. She's got such a sweet demeanor. I like her so far. She seems a little afraid of me, which I don't understand. Maybe she has the idea about people like us, like Jordan did. She didn't trust me. She thought I wasn't real, like I was just doing her a favor by asking her out, or just playing around with a nobody. Her words, not mine. She thought that? briefly, but we got to know each other pretty fast, and she dropped her guard. Logan nodded. So, how serious is it between you two? Eric smiled. It's very serious. So, you think she's the one? I do, he said quietly. Bro, are you telling me that you two are going to get married? He shrugged. I hope so. I know we're young, especially her, and right now she's not stable, so I don't want to mess with her emotions. Logan nodded. Well, all I know is when I ran into her at the coffee house, all she could think about was you. He smiled. She told me that you had my back. Oh, absolutely. I was thinking I was going to have to mess that dude up, but he backed away pretty fast. Yeah, well, when she goes back to school on Monday, I'm going to tell Agent Wyatt to be on the lookout for him. He's a little pushy, and I don't want Jordan to have to deal with a pushy guy right now. Other than you, Logan laughed. I am not pushy, Eric said with a smile. Whatever you say, bro. Back up in the stands with their arms full of goodies, young Eric and Logan doled out the treats. And just as Eric handed Jordan a Milky Way bar and sat down next to her, he could see a group of people headed up toward their area. A couple of agents stepped in front of them and spoke to them, and then one turned and came to speak with Ricky and Bree. Excuse me, Mr. Keno, Mrs. Keno, but those people want me to ask if you would consider signing their programs for them. Ricky looked at Bree and she nodded. 2 at a time, and once we're asked to stand for the national anthem, we're done for the night, Ricky said firmly. He and Bree both stood. Yes, sir, the agent said and hurried down to convey the news to the other agent and the group of autograph seekers. A line formed and the first two approached. Thank you so much, Master Keno, a young woman said. You've been my hero since I was a kid. Thanks for being such a good role model for my son. I'm a single mom, and you really help. Ricky smiled kindly. Well, I'm glad I can help. Is your son with you? He's on the field. He's a lineman for Brookside. Awesome, he said as he signed the program. Another good role model for him would be Gabe Tanner. He should follow him. She laughed. Oh, he does. She turned from him to Bree. Mrs. Adams, I am also a big fan of yours. Bree smiled. Thank you, she said as she quickly signed the program. And so it continued. When a few of the crowd realized that Joey Adams was also in their group, they began to ask him for autographs too. It never ends, does it? Jordan asked. Young Eric shook his head. That's what I'm talking about. It's constant, and that's why I've always kept a low profile. Well, at least after I was bashed in the head when I was 12. That's the skateboard event you told me about? He nodded. So when you and I met, I was wary of you being some rich celeb who just wanted to use me, and you were wary of me liking you just because your family is famous. Well, all I can say is I'm sure glad we got past that, because now you being in my life makes me happy. And when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is I have Jordan in my life. And I smile. She smiled as she licked some chocolate off her lips. I'm glad I can make you smile. They kissed quickly and turned to watch the autograph seekers as they approached his mom and dad. When the Keno signed autographs, they were always careful to see if God was placing someone in their path that needed help. So they always chatted briefly. They always discerned the energy of those who approached them. Everything went smoothly until a lone woman approached. Ricky looked her over. She was large, broad-shouldered, bulging biceps. She wore heavy makeup. One side of her head was shaved, the other side was long, and the long hair was streaked with purple dye. The outlandish appearance didn't bother them. To each his own, or in this case, her own. But Ricky got an immediate vibe of hostility, and he moved forward, slightly in front of Bree. She noticed it and stepped back, trusting her husband's instinct. Ricky turned slightly and glanced at one of the agents nearby and gave a signal by touching his nose, which only means that he senses danger. He smiled at the woman, but she had no program in her hand to be signed. She gave a slight smile and nodded. I don't want your autograph. I would just like to ask you a couple of questions. He nodded. Just a second, he said firmly, and turned to look at his son. He pointed to his eye. Young Eric nodded and immediately pulled out his phone. What's going on? Jordan asked. Dad wants me to video this exchange. I'm going to move over there for a better view. You video from here. She pulled out her phone and started videoing. She looked around and saw that Logan, too, was videoing, and Jason and Joey had stood, as had all the other agents. Shelley turned and placed herself in front of the children, gathering them close to her, and Grandmaster Keno then placed himself in front of her. "Okay," Ricky finally said. "What are your questions?" "So, do you ever intend to fight in another challenge or any other tournament?" Ricky shook his head. "Nope. My tournament days are over." "What about an exhibition-type tournament?" "Well, it would have to be for a really good cause." "Why do you not want to fight in the challenge anymore?" He shrugged. "I'm getting older. I'm 52. Fighting in the challenge is hard on the body." "Well, maybe you could add a division to the challenge and fight women." "We already have a women's division in the challenge." "No, I mean you fight a woman." "It wouldn't be so hard on you to do that, would it?" "It wouldn't be hard on me to do that at all, but I don't fight women." "Well, it wouldn't be just any woman." "It doesn't matter how special the woman is. I don't fight women." "You look like you're in great shape still. You don't look your age. How can you say that it's too hard on you to fight?" "It's too hard on my body to train and fight in a tournament. It's not too hard on me to fight." "Then fight me." He gave a soft laugh. "I don't fight against women." "Why not?" "I've trained almost my whole life in several different styles. I'm strong. I'm fast. I'm mean. I can take you on. Besides, you're assuming my gender, and that's very offensive." Ricky shrugged. "I'll call it like I see it." The woman looked like her head would explode, but got control and calmed herself. "You've never fought a person like me. I'm very good." "Are you afraid?" Ricky sighed. "It wouldn't matter if you were a grandmaster 5 times over. I would beat you." He paused for emphasis. "To a pulp." "Oh, you think you're that good?" she asked, her face turning bright red. "It's not about how good I am. It's about the fact that I'm biologically a man and you're biologically a woman." "Stop saying that." "I call it like I see it." She drew a deep breath. "Fight me, Ricky Keno. If you insist on calling me a woman, then I have to point out that you have a wife and a daughter, and I find it unbelievable that you would discriminate against women." Ricky sighed, realizing she didn't see her own inconsistencies. "Well, first, ma'am, you called yourself a woman at the beginning of this conversation. Second, this has nothing to do with discrimination and everything to do with the difference between men and women. We are not equal, not physically and not temperamentally. In this case, physically, men are stronger, men are faster. It's not discrimination, it's science. It's the way God created us." "Give me a break." Ricky shrugged. "Males and females are different. Look in the animal kingdom. A male lion has that big mane, and the female does not. Their DNA makes them that way. They were made differently. Neither the male lion nor the female is less. They each have a role to play, but they are different. Look at birds, let's say a cardinal. The male is bright red, the female is more muted. It's in their DNA. In the human world, it's the opposite. The female is the one who's bright and beautiful. The human male is bigger and stronger and faster. The male is supposed to protect the female, provide for her. It's not to dominate or discriminate. We should provide our females with all the opportunities to achieve whatever they want, but we keep them safe. We don't hurt them, and we certainly don't fight them. And by the way, when we choose our mates, we choose the ones who look and act like females. It's instinctive to ensure the continuation of our species. And like I said, it's purely science. It's in our chromosomes, our DNA, our hormones. We are different." "Okay, even if I accepted that, which I don't, but even if I did, my skills make me equal." Ricky rolled his eyes. "Your skills may help you against an untrained attacker, and that would be good. But your skills don't make you equal, and they would do nothing to help you against me." "Prove it." He shook his head. "I'm not going to fight you. You are just going to have to take my word for it." She nodded as if she'd come to agree with him. and then swung at him. He blocked it easily and quickly. She swung again. He blocked again. She swung 3 more times, and he blocked her 3 more times, the last time keeping hold of her wrist. So she swung with her free hand, and he held that wrist too, and she struggled to get herself free, but he held her fast. You get the picture yet? He asked. Let me go, she said fiercely. I believe our little question and answer session is over. Let me go, she yelled loudly, getting the attention of other people in the stands, trying to make it look like Ricky was the one doing something wrong. Ricky sighed. Jason gave a slight nod, and 2 of his agents moved in to escort the woman away. Ricky let go of her arms, but suddenly Shelley jumped up and stood in front of the woman. You should be ashamed of yourself, she yelled, coming up here and starting your crap with our family all sitting right here and scaring my young children. You want to fight? I'll kick your butt. You might be a big, strong bully, but I've been trained by the best, and I was just watching you, and you did so many things wrong I couldn't begin to explain it to you. Now you get yourself out of here right now, or I will have you arrested. Shame on you. Shame on you. Jordan's mouth opened in surprise, as did Melody's and a few of the agents. Everyone else only smiled. They knew Shelley well. Grandmaster Keno placed a calming hand on Shelley's shoulder. Down, girl, he said quietly. The woman was escorted away. The Keno signed a few more autographs. The teams left the field. The announcer started speaking, and they were asked to rise for the national anthem, and that was the end of that. They settled in to watch the game, but as tradition, the team chosen for the homecoming game is always a weak one to ensure a homecoming victory. So unfortunately, that only makes the game boring. The score at the half was 38-3. Ricky watched Lance, the QB, who'd forced a kiss on Taylor. He was a decent quarterback, and Ricky wished him nothing but good. Bree looked down at her phone as the field cleared, and the announcer talked about it being homecoming and that they would introduce the homecoming court shortly. He talked about the homecoming parade early the next morning and about the homecoming dance tomorrow night. She looked back up with a smile. Guess who's here and live streaming, she said. Isla August, Jeffy answered. How'd you guess? Bree laughed. Jordan and young Eric looked for her down on the field and pointed at her. The school band finally got situated and began to play Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely? The announcer began with the freshman court, introducing both the young ladies and who they were being escorted by. Some of the girls had their fathers escort them, most had their boyfriends, and some of those boyfriends were in their football gear instead of suits because they were playing tonight. The music switched to a different song for each class. The sophomores got Make You Feel My Love by Adele. The juniors got Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, and the seniors got Pretty Woman. The Kenos all had their phones out. The roar from the crowd when Taylor's name was announced was deafening. Young Eric wondered about it because Taylor had told him she wasn't that popular in school. She'd said she pretty much kept to herself, and he understood that completely. Then when they announced who escorted her, the decibels jumped significantly, making the Kenos laugh. Gabe Tanner was definitely a popular guy. Both Taylor and Gabe flashed brilliant smiles at the warm reception. Jordan smiled. All the girls in their sparkly evening gowns looked so beautiful. Jordan herself had never been to a prom or to a formal dance. Even if she'd been asked, she wouldn't have accepted because she wouldn't have been able to afford the dress. What you thinking about? Young Eric asked her. She smiled up at him and told him what she'd been thinking. Well, Jordan, we have to remedy that, he replied. When you get all healed up, let's go buy you a dress and go out for a formal evening. She shook her head. You don't have to do that for me. I really don't care about stuff like that. I believe you. But if I do it, it would be more for me. I'd love to see you all dolled up and standing next to me. What a treat that would be. Whatever, 3. He smiled at her. Taylor looks absolutely amazing, she said softly. She's unbelievably beautiful. Young Eric nodded. I agree. And the cool part is, she's beautiful on the inside, too. I agree, she sighed. She and Gabe make such a perfect couple. They do. And so do you and I. He lowered his head and kissed her softly. When he pulled away, he looked deeply into her eyes. I love you, Jordan. I love you so much I think my heart might explode. her eyes filled with tears. I love you too, so much, but... She stopped and looked away. But what? She smiled and shook her head. But nothing. He looked closely at her, trying to figure out what she could be thinking, but got distracted as they began to announce the winners of the homecoming court in each class. When it got to the seniors, everyone held their breath to see who would be announced as the homecoming queen, and it was Taylor. Jordan watched Taylor being congratulated as they all left the field and was happy that she'd won, though Taylor herself didn't appear too happy about it. That was odd, and Jordan intended to ask her about it later. Her fellow students, however, seemed to be genuinely excited and happy that Taylor Keno would be their homecoming queen. The boy chosen as king, though, was Lance White, the QB. If they'd been able to vote for someone who didn't go to their school, Gabe Tanner would have won for sure. Jordan frowned. Lance was the guy who'd forced himself on Taylor. He'd apologized, but still, Jordan didn't like it. Apparently, neither did 3. Taylor and Gabe went back to the student section for the second half of the game. Gabe took off his suit jacket and placed it around Taylor's shoulders as the air was getting cooler in the evenings. A few minutes later, 2 police officers approached the Keno family. Everyone looked up. Jason and Justin stood as if they'd been expecting it. Mr. Keno, one of the officers said, directing his words to Ricky. Would you mind stepping out here so we can have a word with you? Ricky sighed and motioned at Justin, who stepped forward with him. One of the officers put his hand out to stop Justin. Excuse me, sir, but we only want to talk to Mr. Keno. You'll have to step back. Justin rolled his eyes. I'm his attorney, and he's not speaking to you without me present. The officer looked a little dismayed, but had no choice but to allow it. Ricky stood on the stairs, looked at the officer expectantly. Mr. Keno, it's come to our attention that a little earlier tonight you punched a woman who'd come to ask for your autograph. Shelley gasped and jumped to her feet. Eric Sr. smiled and tugged on her hand. We got this, Shelley girl. Stay calm. Well, that's a flat-out lie. How can people be so evil, she asked. Anything to try to take out a warrior of God, which Ricky is. Stay calm. Justin nodded at Ricky. I'm afraid you have the facts a little backward, Ricky said calmly. She stated the moment she came up here that she didn't want my autograph. She tried to challenge me to a fight, and I turned her down several times. Mr. Keno, she has the marks on her arms to prove it. And I have video. And that can be presented at court, the officer stated. Ricky's eyebrows rose. What? So you've already decided that you're going to arrest me? Jason immediately got on his phone. Justin stepped forward. I'm going to suggest that you watch the video first, and you'll see that Grandmaster Keno did nothing wrong. The woman threw punches at him, and he blocked them. You'd better think twice before making a false arrest, because I guarantee you that Grandmaster Keno will not just let this one pass. He's at a public high school football game watching his daughter, who was just named homecoming queen. You humiliate him or his daughter by making a false arrest, and he will take it all the way. Are you willing to lose your job over this when you can simply watch the video and see that the woman is trying to be vindictive and telling you a lie? Fine, let me see the video, the officer said. Young Eric pulled the video up on his phone and handed it to the officer. As the officer watched the video, Jason ended his call with a smile. A few minutes later, the other officer got a call. He answered and walked away. When he came back, his face was pale, and he nodded at his partner. Come on, Staten. We've obviously been lied to, and now we have to go arrest Miss Cantrell for making a false accusation and for obstruction of justice. Ricky smiled. Have a nice evening, officers, he said as he went back to his seat. Young Eric retrieved his phone and went back to sit with Jordan. So it's a lucky thing you guys decided to video that conversation, Jordan said. Well, it wasn't luck. There have been many times when we wished we'd made a video. So for the past several years, if any of us had a bad feeling about something, we tap our eye, and that lets the rest of us know that we should record whatever's going down. You guys are just so smart, he laughed. Once bitten, twice shy. I've heard that expression a million times, but never really understood it. Well, it means if something bad happens, you don't want to repeat it, like the proverb, Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We try hard not to be fooled twice. You know how Granddad is always saying the dark forces are trying to put out our light? Well, it's true, and we have to stay awake and aware. Well, doesn't it make you wish that you were just a nobody? Poor, simple, no power. Then those dark forces would just leave you alone. Young Eric's brow furrowed. No. What good would that do? There are scriptures about that, about hiding your light under a bushel, or about not doing anything with what God has given you. We have to be strong and keep fighting the fight, no matter how difficult or tiresome it seems to be. Jordan nodded. I get that. That fierceness in your eyes as you said that hero mode, that's what attracted me to you. I've never met a guy who truly and consciously tries every single day to do something good and right. He shrugged. To those who have been given much, much is expected. I have a strong desire to do God's will. I'm beginning to truly understand that, Jordan said. New scene. It's still November 1st. It's 11 p.m. Friday night, but we're back across the country at Pine County Hospital, just outside of Pine Forest, Georgia. Hold on a minute. Here comes a train. All right, just outside of Pine Forest, Georgia. Chaz Stewart startled briefly when his phone buzzed. He'd been sitting in the small chapel at the hospital, thinking, praying, being grateful, and apparently dozing. He leaned over so he could pull the phone from his pocket and answered it. Hey, Red, you okay? She sighed before she spoke. Yes, I'm okay. Are you still here in the hospital? Yes, of course. I'm not going anywhere. Can you come back to my room? He stood and headed out of the chapel. I'm on my way. Are you sure you're okay? Just a little, I don't know, maybe a mild panic attack. He hit the up button on the wall next to the elevators. Well, that's understandable. Where did you go? He stepped onto the elevator and hit the 2. I went to the NICU to see the babies and then went to the chapel to pray for a bit. You've been gone a long time. Well, I have a lot to be grateful for. She sniffed. Are the babies okay? He stepped off the elevator and turned left. They were both sound asleep. Did you make sure the nurses knew that I'm pumping and that I want to be present at every feeding? I spoke to them briefly about that. One of the nurses said the babies are doing so well, she was surprised to find that they were only 33 weeks. She said they're as if they were full term. They're breathing on their own. They're sucking. I know they seem tiny to us, but she said their weight is really good. At 4 pounds, 14 ounces, and 4 pounds, 1 ounce. Lisa looked up at the doorway, since her husband's voice was coming from there. He smiled, ended the call, pocketed his phone, and came to the side of her bed. Hey, sweetheart. He bent over and kissed her. She smiled and wiped at some tears. Hey. Oh, darling, it's going to be okay. You know that, right? She nodded. Hormones. It's just that I feel so powerless. My babies are in another place being taken care of by strangers. And my other babies are at home after a difficult, traumatic day. Well, Jody and John were with them. You know that they may be traumatized, and John would make sure he speaks with each of them, and especially with Lena. Lisa sniffed. But who's taking care of Lena? If only Jake were home. Our Lena is a strong girl. She's just a baby herself. Did you think of yourself as a baby when you were her age? Lisa smiled and shook her head. No. I thought I was all grown up. I was helping to run a large corporation and dealing with my mother. How old were you when you and Glenn got engaged? I was 24. But here's our Lena married at 20. She'll be 21 in a few weeks. Lisa began to cry. Do you think the babies will be home before her birthday? Chaz sighed. I'm not sure. But they're doing well and may not be in the NICU for long. That's what the doctor said. When did the doctor say that? Earlier today. She shook her head. I don't remember. It's okay. It's been quite a day. He leaned over her, rested his elbow beside her head, and used his other hand to brush a red curl off her face. He smiled at her. Do you know I love you, Red? I mean, I didn't think it was possible to love you more than I already do, but looking down at you right now, looking at this beautiful face, at this gorgeous hair, listening to you share your concerns about everyone except yourself. What an amazing person you are. So selfless and so strong. She sniffed. I'm not feeling so strong right now. He put the bed rail down and kicked off his shoes. Scoot over. She did as he asked, and he lay down beside her, facing her, his right arm under her head, his left hand caressing her cheek. You want to cry? You go ahead and cry. Get it out. His words started the fountain of tears. Oh, Chaz. I don't know why I feel like crying. I mean, I could be dead. The babies could be dead. Instead, we're all still alive. That's right. And the babies could have been injured, but they weren't. And do you realize what a miracle it is that you have no serious injuries other than some cuts on your head and some bruises on your body? Today was a miracle. She sobbed hard for a minute and then looked up. But poor Sarah and the driver. Well, I checked on Sarah earlier, and her back is broken in 2 places, but her spinal cord is intact. They said when the swelling goes down, they believe she'll regain complete mobility. Really? That's so good to know. And the driver's name was Martin Monroe. He was 38, and he had a wife and 2 kids. And John has started a fund for his family, and the Kenos have already made it go way past the goal. The Kenos are such good people. But why did this guy have to die? Remember, God has a plan. Nothing is random. Remember what God told Gabe, or maybe it was Grandmaster Keno, but he said that the good people that knew and loved Jesus when he was on earth, they prayed that God would save him. They asked God to keep Jesus from being crucified, but God didn't save his own son because it was part of the plan. So we have to stop questioning every time someone dies, every time something bad happens. There are reasons. There is a plan. And if God wants us to pick up that cross and bear it, then we will. He sighed heavily. I thought I was going to have to do that today. I thought I was going to be planning a funeral for my wife and 2 children. But apparently you and the babies leaving the earth today was not part of the plan. It was a miracle that you survived. And I'm so grateful, Lisa. So, so grateful. Now, the other driver. What other driver? He glanced down at her, his brow furrowed. Remember Milena told you about the cement truck? The cement truck? Sweetheart, a guy in a cement truck had a heart attack, and he swung into our lane and he hit the ambulance. It would have been head on, but Martin swerved, which is why the ambulance flipped several times. Oh, is that what happened? Chaz swallowed. Yes, baby, and we've already told you that. You really don't remember? Everything is such a blur. Maybe it's just from the shock and trauma, but you're worrying me. I think I'm going to have a word with your doctor. Well, don't get too worried. There's been a lot going on today. Yeah, I guess so. So, thinking about what you just told me, I mean, don't you think it's a huge coincidence that the driver of the cement truck jerked the wheel at the exact moment to hit us? Yes. And you know there are no such things as coincidences. So what are you saying? She asked. Well, these babies are important. They're supposed to come into this world at this time. They are meant to be. They weren't an accident. I mean, you're 46 years old. We haven't used protection in years, and suddenly you get pregnant with twins, and so does Lizzie, and our friends on the West Coast all get pregnant. Jeffy, Kim, and Mickey, and Marissa, and Bella, and almost all of them are coming into the world about the same time, between November and January. These children are going to be some of God's strongest warriors. They are children of light, and they're important. Okay, they're important. And so, as Grandmaster Keener likes to say, the dark forces of the world, Satan and his minions, are working hard to stop these lights from coming into the world. They tried with you, but God was with us, and he protected the babies, and he protected you. So what kind of mission do you think these children have? He shook his head. I don't know. We need to pray about that and seek answers. We might be on a need-to-know basis. They could be here to simply hold light in this world until the tribulation. They could be here to help with a great awakening or revival before the last days. Because I believe, Lisa, we are getting very close to what takes place in Revelation. She nodded. I believe that too. One only has to look around at the evil in this world that is encroaching from every corner to know that we are, quote, as in the days of Noah. I wonder what our children's mission will be. I don't know. Do you think God told Mary what his plans were for Jesus? I mean, maybe she knew, or maybe she only felt it was something ominous. Maybe he shared it with her when he got older. Of course, our children are just human children, but still, if they have a special calling, we'll eventually know. So until then, we do our very best to raise them close to the Lord, to teach them, to protect them from the dark forces. We will pray over them each and every day like we do over the others, and we'll ask God what we can do to keep them safe, both physically and spiritually. Lisa yawned. Chaz, it's such a blessing that I can depend on you, not just for your physical strength, but for your spiritual strength. Yeah, well, I'm trying. You know, I didn't do right by Carrie and Julie. Carrie begged me to talk to Jesus. I was so stubborn. So was she, Lisa said, and I'm so grateful for that. She was so strong. It was her words that eventually brought you and I both to Jesus, which meant she brought our children to Jesus too. She fulfilled her mission, and I'm truly grateful to her. Chaz cleared his throat from the emotions that welled up. Lisa, that is a beautiful thing to say. Lord have mercy, I love you so much. Chaz, will you hold me while I sleep? The babies will be ready for a feeding soon. He pulled her close. I got you, Lisa. Sleep, baby. And that is the end of chapter 15.